A tense silence filled the grand halls of the Galactic University of Cultural Studies on Nexus 7. The pristine white corridors, usually buzzing with the sounds of various alien species going about their daily routines, seemed unusually quiet. Today marked a historic moment, the arrival of their first human professor. Professor Hei-Yun walked through the sensor-activated doors, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. Unlike the floating or gliding movements of most faculty members, her bipedal stride created a distinct rhythm that made several passing students pause and stare. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and she wore the standard teacher's robe, though it sat differently on her muscular frame than it did on the more ethereal species that typically wore it. In the faculty lounge, Professor Luminax, a being made of pure light and energy, approached Hei-Yun. "Welcome to our institution," they said, their voice a melodious hum. "I must admit, there has been much discussion about your appointment." Hei-Yun smiled, noting how Luminax maintained a careful distance. "I understand. It's not every day a predator species teaches cultural studies." The morning's first class brought its own set of challenges. As Hei-Yun entered the lecture hall, she could feel the nervous energy radiating from her students. The classroom was designed to accommodate various alien physiologies: floating platforms for gaseous beings, crystalline regeneration stations for the mineral-based life forms, and conventional seats for the more solid species. Merrick, a Luvian student, sat near the front. Their crystalline bodies sparkled with rainbow reflections, but the usually clear surface showed clouds of anxiety. Next to them, Toril, a being from the mist colonies, floated in their containment field, their gaseous forms swirling with uncertain patterns. In the back row, Fira, an insectoid scholar from the Hive networks, clicked their mandibles thoughtfully. Unlike their classmates, they seemed more curious than afraid, their compound eyes fixed intently on their new professor. "Good morning, class," Hei-Yun began, her voice steady and warm. "I am Professor Hei-Yun, and I'll be teaching Galactic Cultural Studies this term." She noticed how several students flinched at the sound of her voice, deeper and more resonant than the high-pitched tones they were used to. A brave student raised their appendage. "Professor, is it true that humans are carnivores?" The question came from a small, plant-based being whose leaves trembled slightly. Hei-Yun nodded, maintaining her gentle smile. "We're actually omnivores, meaning we eat both plant and animal matter. But I assure you, all my meals come from the synthetic food processors, just like everyone else's." This caused a ripple of movement through the class. Merrick's crystal structure clouded further, and Toril's gaseous form compressed slightly. "Perhaps," Hei-Yun continued, "we should address the elephant in the room." She paused, then quickly added, "That's a human expression meaning to discuss an obvious problem no one wants to mention. Yes, humans are classified as predator species. Yes, we have a history that many find concerning. But that's precisely why I'm here, to help bridge the gap of understanding between our species." She walked to the holoprojector and activated it, displaying an image of Earth. "My homeworld might seem harsh to many of you. We evolved on a planet with high gravity, extreme temperature variations, and the constant threat of predation. These conditions shaped us into what we are today." Farah raised an appendage. "Professor, is it accurate that humans can continue functioning even after sustaining significant physical damage?" Their question caused several students to emit distress signals in various forms: color changes, pheromone releases, and electromagnetic pulses. "Yes, that's correct," Hei-Yun answered honestly. "Our bodies have remarkable healing capabilities, which evolved as a survival mechanism. But these same abilities also led us to develop advanced medical knowledge that we now share with the galactic community." As the class progressed, Hei-Yun noticed subtle changes in her students' reactions. Their initial fear began to mix with curiosity. Even Merrick's crystalline form started to clear slightly, though they still maintained a safe distance. By the end of the session, when Hei-Yun announced their first assignment, a comparative study of evolution on different worlds, she saw something she hadn't expected: excitement, The students had begun to see past their initial fear, recognizing that understanding other species, even predatory ones, was crucial to their education. As the students filed out, Farah lingered behind. "Professor," they clicked, "I find it fascinating how your species turns survival adaptations into tools for advancement. Would you be willing to discuss this further during office hours?" Yun felt a warm sense of accomplishment. This was why she had accepted this position, to break down barriers and build understanding. "Of course," she replied. "That's exactly why I'm here." Standing alone in the lecture hall afterward, Yun reflected on the morning's events. It was just the beginning of a long journey, but she had taken the first step in showing her students that being different didn't mean being dangerous. The real test would come in the days ahead, as they delved deeper into human history and culture. But for now, she had planted the seeds of understanding in fertile ground. The morning sun cast strange shadows through the crystalline windows of the Galactic University as Professor Yun prepared for her second class. She had spent hours carefully selecting the historical footage and information to present, knowing that today's lesson would challenge her students' understanding of humanity. As the students filed in, she noticed their movements were less hesitant than during the first class. Merrick's crystalline form glowed with a soft blue light, indicating curiosity rather than the previous day's fear. Toril floated to their designated spot, their gaseous form swirling in gentle patterns, while Farah's antennae twitched with anticipation. "Today," Yun began, activating the holoprojector, "we'll explore how human societies first developed." The image of an ancient African savanna materialized in the center of the room, complete with tall grass swaying in the wind. "Our ancestors began as gatherers, much like many of your species," she explained, watching her students relax slightly at this familiar concept. "But what set us apart was our adaptation to become persistent hunters." The holoprojector shifted to show a reconstruction of early humans tracking an antelope. Merrick's crystalline surface began to cloud with unease as they watched the scene unfold. "Our bodies evolved to shed heat efficiently through sweating," Yun continued, pointing to the anatomical displays. "While most animals needed to stop and pant to cool down, we could keep running, hour after hour, under the hot sun." Toril's gas sacs contracted visibly. "You mean, you chased living beings until they collapsed?" Their voice wavered with a mix of horror and disbelief. "Indeed," Yun replied calmly. "It's called persistence hunting, and it helped shape our evolution." She paused, noting how the classroom had fallen into a deep silence. Only Farah showed obvious interest, their mandibles clicking rapidly as they took detailed notes. "But this isn't just about hunting," Yun continued, changing the display to show various human tools. "This ability to persist, to keep going when others would stop, shaped every aspect of our development. We learned to make tools, to work together, to communicate over long distances." A small voice came from the back of the room. Did you enjoy causing suffering?" The question came from Lumi, a bioluminescent student whose light had dimmed to almost nothing. Yun's expression softened. "No, Lumi. Our ancestors respected the animals they hunted. They used every part of their prey and often performed rituals to honor their spirits. The hunt wasn't about causing suffering, it was about survival." The holoprojector shifted again, showing early human cave paintings. "Look at these," Yun said, gesturing to the ancient artwork. "Our ancestors recorded their hunts, but also their dreams, their fears, their hopes. They painted the animals they hunted with beauty and reverence." Merrick's crystalline form began to clear slightly. "The patterns, they're like our memory crystals. They were preserving their history." "Exactly," Yun smiled. "And these hunting techniques led to something even more remarkable." She changed the display to show early human settlements. "Our endurance allowed us to follow herds, which led to understanding migration patterns. This knowledge helped us develop agriculture, permanent settlements, and eventually civilization." Farah raised an appendage. Professor, could this persistence hunting explain why humans continue tasks long after other species would consider them impossible? Very insightful. Farah. Hei-yun nodded. This same determination that let us track prey for days now drives us to solve complex problems, explore new worlds, and yes, even teach in universities far from our home planet. The tension in the room began to shift to something more like understanding. Even Toral's gas sacs had returned to their normal size, though they still swirled with uncertain patterns. Before we end today's lesson, Hei-yun said, I want you to consider something. Every species in this room evolved different survival strategies. The Luvians developed crystalline forms to store and share knowledge. The mist colony beings learned to float and change form to avoid predators. The hive network species developed complex social structures for protection and efficiency. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humans, we learned to endure, to persist, to keep going when everything told us to stop. Yes, this made us fearsome hunters, but it also made us explorers, innovators, and problem solvers. The same drive that powered our hunting now fuels our scientific discoveries and our desire to understand other species, like all of you. As the class ended, the students lingered longer than usual, discussing the lesson among themselves. Farah approached Hei-yun's desk, their mandibles moving thoughtfully. Professor, they clicked. I believe I understand now. The physical act of hunting was just the beginning. The real evolution was in the mind. The determination to continue despite obstacles. Hei-yun nodded, pleased. That's exactly right, Farah. And that determination is what brought humanity to the stars, and eventually to this classroom. As the students finally filed out, Hei-yun noticed something different in their movements. There was still caution, yes, but also something new, respect. They were beginning to understand that what made humans different, even frightening, was also what made them remarkable. She began preparing for the next day's lesson, knowing that each revelation about human nature would bring new challenges and opportunities for understanding. The journey from fear to comprehension was a long one, but like her ancestors on those ancient savannas, Hei-yun was prepared to persist until she reached her goal. The tension in the lecture hall was thick enough to cut with a knife as Professor Hei-yun prepared the holoprojector for today's lesson. She knew this would be the most challenging session yet, covering human warfare and conflict. The subject had kept her awake the previous night, considering how to present such difficult material to her sensitive students. Merrick sat in their usual spot, their crystalline form reflecting the morning light in rainbow patterns. Toral's gaseous body floated serenely in their containment field, while Farah's compound eyes tracked every movement Hei-yun made. The rest of the class settled into an uneasy quiet as the lights dimmed. Today, Hei-yun began, her voice steady. We'll discuss how conflict shaped human development. The holoprojector flickered to life, showing ancient human warriors with spears and shields. Like many species, we fought over resources and territory. But human warfare evolved in unique ways. A small whimper came from somewhere in the classroom as the first images of battle appeared. Hei-yun quickly switched to a diagram instead. What made human combat different was our ability to continue fighting despite injuries that would incapacitate most species. Toral's gaseous form began to swirl erratically. You mean, you kept fighting while damaged? Their voice trembled with disbelief. Yes, Hei-yun responded, bringing up medical diagrams. Human bodies can survive severe trauma. We can lose significant amounts of blood and continue functioning. Broken bones can heal. Even damaged organs can often repair themselves. Merrick's crystal structure started vibrating, creating a high-pitched hum that filled the room. Several students moved away from them, worried about potential crystalline resonance collapse. But please understand, Hei-yun continued quickly, this resilience led to something remarkable. She switched the display to show ancient medical texts. Our ability to survive injury drove us to develop advanced medical knowledge. What began as battlefield medicine evolved into healing arts that now benefit all species. Toral's form had turned a sickly shade of green, their usual pearlescent swirls now muddy and slow. How could you bear such pain? They whispered. Adaptation and determination, Hei-Yun explained. Our bodies produce natural pain-blocking chemicals called endorphins. We can enter a state called shock that allows us to continue functioning despite severe injury. Merrick suddenly stood, their crystal form vibrating so intensely that nearby students covered their sensory organs. Without a word, they hurried from the classroom, leaving behind a trail of tiny crystal shards. Hei-Yun watched them go with concern but continued the lesson. This resilience had an unexpected benefit. Understanding how our bodies heal led to breakthroughs in medical science. The same mechanisms that let us survive battlefield injuries now help us cure diseases and heal injuries in all species. Farah raised an appendage, their mandibles clicking excitedly. Is this why humans are now leading figures in galactic medicine? Because you understood healing through your own survival. Exactly. Hei-Yun nodded, grateful for the Insitoid's insight. Our history of conflict drove us to understand our bodies better. Each war, tragic as it was, pushed medical knowledge forward. Today, those same techniques save countless lives across the galaxy. Toral had compressed themselves into a tight ball of gas, their usual flowing form now dense and troubled. But the pain, the suffering. Yes, Hei-Yun acknowledged softly. There was great suffering, but humans learned from it. We developed not just medical knowledge, but also complex social structures to prevent war. Our history of conflict taught us the value of peace. She switched the display to show modern human peaceful achievements: hospitals, research centers, space exploration vessels. Today, we use our resilience differently. Instead of surviving battles, we survive the challenges of space exploration. Instead of developing weapons, we develop cures. A small voice came from the back of the room. Professor, are humans still dangerous? The question came from a photosynthetic student whose leaves were trembling slightly. Hei-Yun considered her answer carefully. We retain our capacity for survival and resilience, but we've learned to channel these traits into protection rather than aggression. The same determination that once kept us fighting now keeps us searching for scientific breakthroughs or exploring new worlds. As she spoke, she noticed Toral's gaseous form slowly returning to its normal pearlescent color. Several other students also showed signs of relaxing, their various physiologies easing from their defensive postures. Before we end today, Hei-Yun said, I want you to consider something. Every species' traits can be viewed as either threatening or beneficial, depending on perspective. Our resilience might seem frightening, but it's the same trait that lets us work tirelessly to solve problems that benefit all species. The class ended with a subdued atmosphere, but not entirely one of fear. As students filed out, Hei-Yun noticed them clustering in small groups, discussing the lesson in hushed tones. Farah remained behind, their antennae waving thoughtfully. Professor, they clicked. I believe I understand. Human resilience is like our hive's collective strength. It can be used for defense or aggression, but its true value lies in how it serves the greater good. Hei-Yun smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. Even on this difficult day, understanding was growing. She made a mental note to check on Merrick later, knowing that every student would process these revelations differently. The path to understanding humanity's nature was challenging, but like all things in human history, it was a challenge worth persisting through. Professor Hei-Yun stood before her class, ready to begin what she thought would be a lighter lesson. After the heavy topics of warfare and survival, she had planned to show the more playful side of human nature through sports and recreational activities. She couldn't have been more wrong about the reaction it would cause. Today, we'll explore how humans spend their leisure time. She began, activating the holoprojector. The first image showed a mountain climber scaling a sheer cliff face without safety equipment. Before she could explain, a wave of distress signals filled the room, from electromagnetic pulses to pheromone releases. This activity is called free soloing, she continued, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. Humans climb dangerous heights for the thrill of achievement. Merrick's crystalline form began to cloud immediately, turning from clear to completely opaque in seconds. Their telepathic transmission rippled through the classroom. They do this for fun. The next series of images showed parkour practitioners leaping between buildings, skydivers plummeting from aircraft, and ultra-marathon runners pushing through extreme conditions. Each new image caused more distress among the students. Toral's gaseous form began to pulse rapidly, changing colors from their usual pearl to an alarming shade of orange. "Professor," they wobbled. "Are these individuals being punished?" "No," Hayden replied. "These are voluntary activities. Humans seek out these challenges for entertainment and personal growth." She switched to footage of mixed martial arts competitions, showing fighters trading blows in the ring. The reaction was immediate and intense. Several students activated their emergency shields, while others began emitting high-pitched distress calls. Merrick's crystal structure started resonating at a frequency that threatened to shatter nearby equipment. "Please remain calm," Heyun called out over the growing chaos. "These are regulated sports with safety measures in place." "Safety measures," a voice shrieked from the back. "They're deliberately causing harm to each other." The footage shifted to show extreme sports: wingsuit flying between mountains, ice climbing, and deep-sea freediving. The classroom erupted into complete disorder. Some students began to flee, while others froze in their protective stances. "What you're seeing is humans pushing their limits," Heyun tried to explain over the commotion. "We do this to test ourselves, to grow stronger." "This is madness." Toral expanded their gaseous form in agitation. No sane species would willingly risk termination for entertainment. The situation deteriorated further when the holoprojector displayed footage of the running of the bulls in Pamplona. Several students immediately evacuated the classroom, while others began sending emergency signals to their embassy representatives. Merrick, usually one of the more composed students, transmitted a final desperate thought before rushing out. They chase death itself and call it sport. Within minutes, the classroom had nearly emptied. Only Fira remained, their compound eyes fixed on the images with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Professor," they clicked quietly, "is this why humans advanced so quickly? This constant need to challenge your own limits?" Before Heyun could respond, university security arrived, having been alerted by the mass of distress signals. Behind them came Dean Luminax, their light form pulsing with concern. "Professor Heyun," the dean hummed, "we've received multiple complaints and a formal petition. The students, led by Toral, are requesting the removal of what they term disturbing human content from the curriculum." Heyun stood her ground. "Dean Luminax, understanding human recreation is crucial to understanding our species. These activities show our drive to improve, to push boundaries." By deliberately risking termination, the dean's light flickered with disbelief. "The board will need to review this situation carefully." As the security team began checking the classroom for distressed students who might have hidden rather than fled, Heyun gathered her teaching materials. She noticed Fira still hadn't left. "Professor," the insectoid student clicked softly, "I believe I understand something. Humans don't just survive challenges, you actively seek them out. Is this why your species progressed from primitive hunters to spacefaring civilization so quickly?" Heyun nodded, grateful for at least one student's insight. "Our drive to challenge ourselves, to push beyond comfortable limits, has been key to our development. What looks like reckless behavior to other species is actually part of our growth process." Later that day, as Heyun read through the formal petition with its long list of signatures, she realized she had underestimated how deeply alien species would be disturbed by human recreational activities. The petition described human sports as evidence of a deeply disturbed species with self-destructive tendencies. She began preparing her response to the university board, knowing she would need to find a way to help them understand that what looked like madness to other species was actually a fundamental part of human nature. the desire to push boundaries, to explore limits, to challenge the impossible. The question was, could she make them understand before they decided to terminate her teaching position? Outside her office window, she could see groups of students gathered, their various forms showing signs of agitation as they discussed the day's events. The challenge ahead was clear. She needed to bridge the gap between human and alien understanding, to show that what seemed like a death wish was actually humanity's greatest strength, the desire to grow, to improve, and to evolve. The administrative board had posted guards outside Professor Hae-Yun's classroom following last week's incident. Despite the controversy and pending review of her teaching position, she arrived early to prepare for today's crucial lesson. The room was notably emptier than usual, with only the bravest students returning. Merrick sat far at the back, their crystalline forms still clouded with unease. Toril had chosen not to attend, but Farah occupied their usual front seat, mandibles moving in anticipation. Several other students huddled in protective clusters, their various defense mechanisms clearly visible. Today, Hae-Yun began, her voice steady and calm. We'll explore how humanity's challenging nature led to our greatest achievements in medicine and healing. She activated the holoprojector, which displayed a timeline of human medical discoveries. Our history began with battlefield medicine, she explained, showing ancient surgical tools. When our aggressive nature led to injuries, we had to learn to heal quickly. But look what this drive to survive created. The display shifted to show modern medical facilities. A student in the back gasped as they recognized some of the equipment. Those are cell regenerators. We use those in our medical bays. Exactly, Hae-Yun smiled. Human scientists developed these while trying to speed up our natural healing abilities. Our drive to survive and overcome obstacles pushed us to find solutions others might never consider. She brought up another image, this time showing a human surgeon performing a delicate operation. The same steady hands that once held weapons now save lives across the galaxy. The focus that helped us hunt now helps us perform microsurgery. Merrick's crystalline form began to clear slightly, showing interest despite their lingering fear. But the aggression, the violence, became precision and determination. Hae-Yun finished. Watch this. She played footage of a human surgeon working for 36 hours straight to save a patient. The same endurance that made us dangerous hunters now lets us fight death itself. Farah raised an appendage, their compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. So human aggression served a greater purpose in your development? Yes, Hae-Yun replied, switching to displays of human research laboratories. Our relentless nature, which frightens so many, drives us to fight disease, to solve medical mysteries, to find cures where others might give up. She showed them statistics of human medical breakthroughs in the past century. We attacked problems with the same intensity we once attacked prey. When a disease seemed unbeatable, we refused to accept defeat. When conventional treatments failed, we tried unconventional ones. A small voice came from the middle of the room. Is that why humans were the first to cure the Rigelian plague? It was a student who had previously signed a petition against her. Exactly, Hae-Yun nodded. When other species declared the plague incurable, human scientists worked themselves to exhaustion, trying treatment after treatment. We refused to accept failure. That same stubborn persistence that makes us scary in conflict makes us unstoppable in research. She displayed images of human doctors working in disaster zones across the galaxy. The same adrenaline that once prepared us for battle now keeps us going during medical emergencies. The aggressive protection of our tribe became the protection of all sentient life. Merrick's crystal structure had cleared considerably. So when we see human aggression, you're seeing the force that drives us to protect and heal, Hae-Yun completed. Our medical ships are the first to respond to planetary disasters. Our trauma teams work in the most dangerous conditions. We use our scary traits to save lives. The room had grown quiet, but it was different from the fearful silence of previous classes. This was the silence of understanding beginning to dawn. Farah clicked their mandibles thoughtfully. Professor, is this why humans often serve as emergency responders? Because you can function in conditions that would incapacitate other species. Precisely. Hei-yun brought up footage of human rescue workers pulling survivors from a collapsed building. The same strength that makes us formidable in conflict makes us excellent at saving lives. The endurance that let us chase prey now lets us search for survivors long after others would quit. As the class continued, Hei-yun noticed subtle changes in her students' postures. Their defensive stances gradually relaxed. Even Merrick had moved closer to the front, their crystal form now almost completely clear. Before we end today, Hei-yun said, I want you to consider this. Every trait that makes a species successful can appear frightening out of context. But understanding the full picture shows how these traits serve a greater purpose. After class, several students lingered, asking questions about human medical achievements. Even some who had signed the petition seemed to be reconsidering their position. Farah approached Hei-yun's desk last. Professor, they clicked. I believe I understand now. Humans aren't aggressive for aggression's sake. You're aggressive in your protection of life itself. Hei-yun smiled, feeling hope for the first time since the controversy began. Today's lesson had shown her students a different side of human nature, not just the capacity for violence, but the deeper drive to protect and heal. It was a small step, but an important one in building understanding between species. As she gathered her materials, she noticed the guards outside looking in with curiosity. Perhaps they too were beginning to see that what made humans different wasn't just their capacity for violence, but their determination to use that same force to protect and heal others. The day began like any other at the Galactic University of Cultural Studies. Professor Hei-yun was midway through her lecture on human adaptability when the first warning signs appeared. The ambient lighting flickered, and a subtle change in air pressure made several students shift uncomfortably. At first, no one paid much attention. The university's environmental systems occasionally needed minor adjustments, but then the temperature began to drop rapidly, and the oxygen mix in the atmosphere started to thin. Hei-yun noticed it first, her human lungs more sensitive to oxygen changes than most species. She saw Toral's gaseous form beginning to destabilize, their usual swirling patterns becoming erratic. Merrick's crystalline surface started to frost over, and Farah's exoskeleton began clicking with stress. Something's wrong with the atmospheric regulators, Hei-yun announced, her training kicking in. While other professors in nearby classrooms were still trying to maintain order, she was already moving. Everyone who can move, head to the emergency shelters. Those who can't, stay calm. I'm coming to help. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The temperature plummeted, causing some of the crystalline students to begin cracking. The atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly, threatening to crush or explode the more delicate species. Hei-yun moved with purpose, her savage human strength now a blessing. She lifted Merrick, whose crystal form had partially frozen to their seat, and carried them to safety. The cold that would have stopped most species barely slowed her down. How are you still functioning? Merrick transmitted weakly as Hei-yun placed them in a thermal shelter. Human adaptability, she replied, already turning to help others. We evolved to handle extreme conditions. The emergency systems had failed to activate, and panic was spreading through the campus. Hei-yun saw Toral struggling to maintain their gaseous form against the pressure changes. Without hesitation, she grabbed a nearby containment field generator and modified it to create a stable environment for them. Professor, Toral wobbled as she secured them. Your hands are bleeding from the cold. Just a minor injury, Hei-yun assured them, ignoring the pain. Humans can function through much worse. As she worked her way through the building, she found Farah trying to help other students, but struggling with the dropping oxygen levels. The insectoid's compound eyes were dimming from lack of air. Save yourself, Professor, Farah clicked weakly. Your species' survival instinct is exactly why I won't leave anyone behind. Hei-yun finished, helping them to safety. Hours passed as Hei-yun worked tirelessly. She carried injured students to safety, rigged emergency containment fields, and even helped the maintenance crew diagnose the problem with the atmospheric systems. Her human endurance, once viewed with fear, now kept her going when others had to rest. The university's engineering team struggled with the frozen regulatory systems, their appendages too cold to function properly. Hei-yun stepped in, her human hands still working despite the freezing temperature. She remembered how her ancestors had survived ice ages and pushed through. "The backup systems are completely frozen," one engineer reported. "We can't reach the manual override." "I can," Hei-yun said, climbing into a maintenance shaft too cold for other species to survive in. Her fingers were numb, but she remembered her lessons about human persistence hunting. The same determination that had once let humans chase prey for days now kept her going. Students gathered around the emergency shelters, watching in amazement as their once-feared professor worked without rest. They saw her ignore injuries that would have incapacitated their species, push through conditions that should have been lethal, and keep helping long after exhaustion should have claimed her. "Is this what you meant about human persistence?" Fira asked when Hei-yun finally got the systems running again, her hands bloody from working with frozen machinery. "Yes," she managed between heavy breaths. "What you see is savage survival instincts. This is what they're really for. To protect, to help, to keep going when others can't." As warmth returned to the campus and students began emerging from the shelters, the atmosphere had changed in more ways than one. They looked at Hei-yun differently now. The same traits that had terrified them, her strength, her endurance, her refusal to give up, had saved many lives. Merrick approached her as medical teams arrived to treat the injured. Their crystal form was clear now, all traces of fear gone. "We misunderstood," they transmitted. "What we saw as aggression was really protective instinct." Hei-yun, finally allowing herself to rest, nodded. "Humans didn't evolve to be cruel," she explained. "We evolved to survive, and to help others survive too. Sometimes that looks scary from the outside." In the days that followed, the petition against her teaching was withdrawn. Students who had once avoided her now sought her out, curious to learn more about human adaptability and endurance. The university board, rather than restricting her curriculum, asked her to develop additional courses on human emergency response techniques. Toril, who had led the petition against her, became one of her strongest supporters. "We feared human nature without understanding it," they admitted. "Now we see that what makes humans dangerous also makes them invaluable allies." As Hei-yun prepared for her next class, her injuries still healing, she knew the crisis had taught her students something no lecture could have conveyed. They had seen firsthand how humanity's savage traits, their strength, their persistence, their ability to function through pain, could be used to protect and save rather than harm. The fear had been replaced by understanding, and perhaps something more: respect. The final week of Professor Hei-yun's controversial course arrived with an atmosphere completely different from its beginning. The lecture hall was packed beyond capacity, with students from other departments crowding in to witness the final presentations. Even members of the university board had come to observe. The change was evident in how the students carried themselves. No more defensive postures or fear responses. Instead, there was an air of excitement and anticipation. Merrick's crystal form glowed with confidence as they prepared their presentation materials, while Toril's gaseous form swirled with eager patterns. "Today," Hei-yun announced, "your research projects will demonstrate your understanding of human nature and its impact on galactic society." Merrick went first, their crystalline surface pulsing with light as they presented. "Human medical advances," they began, "were born from what we once feared as savagery. Their ability to survive severe injuries led them to understand healing in ways no other species considered." The crystal beam projected images of human emergency responders working in disaster zones. Their predatory endurance became the stamina to work for days, saving lives. Their aggressive persistence became the determination to find cures for diseases we thought hopeless. Next came Toril, who had once led the petition against Heiyun's teaching. Their gaseous form expanded confidently as they spoke. Human protective instincts, which terrified us at first, are the reason their rescue teams are first to respond to any crisis. They use their predatory strength to shield others from harm. One by one, students presented their findings. Farah's analysis of human problem-solving showed how their aggressive approach to challenges led to breakthrough discoveries. Others explored how human competitive nature drove technological advancement, how their pack-hunting past created strong teamwork abilities, and how their predatory focus developed into scientific precision. The university board members watched with growing interest as each presentation revealed new aspects of human nature. The same traits that had caused concern at the start of the term were now being recognized as valuable assets to galactic society. A small plant-based student, who had once trembled at Heiyun's presence, gave a moving presentation on human environmental protection efforts. They fight to defend ecosystems with the same intensity they once used to hunt, they explained. Their predatory instincts became a force for preservation. As the presentations continued, Heiyun noticed how the students had moved beyond simple acceptance to genuine appreciation of human traits. They no longer saw humanity's nature as something to be feared or tolerated, but as a unique and valuable part of galactic diversity.